What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be doing another Roblox coding tutorial, and we're actually going to be building on what we did yesterday with our bank system. We're going to be making a shop system so that players can use the money that they've made to go and spend it at the various shops that you have in your game. The cool thing about this shop is it's very easy to configure, so once we have it set up, if you want to add more items to it, all you have to do is duplicate the buttons, change the price, change the name, and make sure the tool is in the server storage. But once that is all done, it's pretty much set up and you can duplicate it and have multiple shops. And the cool thing about it as well is we'll make it so that when the tools are given and the player dies, they'll automatically respawn with those tools. So without further ado, guys, let's open up our studio and let's get to work. This is going to be a pretty easy tutorial today, so I hope you're excited. So the first thing that we want to do when we're in Studio is we kind of just want to make sure that we have everything closed and ready to start work. So we're going to make sure that we start by creating a screen GUI, and so we're going to rename this to store1. You can name it whatever you want, it does not matter. And then what we're going to want to do is create a frame inside of that screen GUI, and we're going to resize it just so it's a nice size on our screen, and we're going to center it up. And so once we have that, we're going to make a scrolling frame inside of this frame, and so I'm going to have a little bit of an offset for it, and you can make it the exact size if you want, it doesn't really matter. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and stylize our frames. What I really like to do is make everything black and then set the background transparency to like 0.5, and then we're going to go to our scrolling frame and we're going to make the background transparency 1 so you cannot see it at all. And so inside the scrolling frame, this is where we're going to put our buttons at. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is put a UI grid layout, and then we're going to want to add a button. And so we're going to want to go into the UI grid layout, and then we're going to edit these cell size values. And it took me a minute to kind of come up with a value that I like, but I think I settled on 125 and 50, and it seemed to be a nice size for the button. And so once we have that, we're going to want to scroll down in the UI grid layout frame, and we're going to want to center everything up. And again, I'm still messing with the cell size values here, but we can go down and we can find the horizontal alignment and we can change it to center, and so now the button will line up perfectly. And so I'm going to change it to 125 now, and I think that's a good size. So now we can style our button, and we can change the background transparency to black, and then change the background transparency to 0.8. And then we're going to go down and we're going to change the text color to white, and then we're going to make the button text luckiest guy, because that's my favorite text. And so once we have that, we can change the button text to pretty much whatever you want. We're going to end up manipulating that with the script later, so it doesn't really matter. What does matter is the name of your button. So the name of your button is also going to be the same name of your tool, and you want to make sure that whatever your tool name is, you name the button that exact name. And so once you have that, you want to create an int value inside of the button and rename it to price. And so then I'm going to create 2 or 3 buttons now, just for the purpose of the video, and you can go ahead and put in whatever you want for it. You can do swords, guns, whatever it is, it doesn't really matter, as long as you put it in the server storage and the button is the same name as the tool, it'll work. And so now that we have that, our GUI is pretty much set up, and we can go ahead and set the frame to invisible if we want. I'm going to end up adding a close button later, but we'll do that before we move on to the server side. So now what we want to do is put a local script inside of our frame, and this is where we're going to start coding. So the first thing I'm going to do is set up my parameters. I'm going to have 3 or 4 parameters. I'm going to have the player, so local player is equal to game.players.localPlayer, and then local money stat is equal to player.money or player.playerstats.cash, and then local buttons is equal to script.parent dot, oh, I'm sorry, local frame is equal to script.parent, and then local buttons will be equal to frame dot scrolling frame dot or get descendants. And so what that's going to do is get all the descendants of the scrolling frame, and that's going to be useful for what we're about to do next. And so what we want to do is have a for IV in pairs loop run through all these buttons and figure out which ones are actually buttons. And then whenever it figures out which ones are buttons, that's when we can start making the buttons do their functions based on which player pressed which button. And so we're going to go ahead and loop through this. So we're going to say for I comma buttons in pairs, buttons in the parentheses, do, and then we're going to say, once we have this, we want to check to see if the buttons that the script is getting is actually a button. So we're going to say if button is a, and then we're going to do a parentheses and then quotations, and we're going to say text button. And then if you have an image button, you want to say or, and then button is a image button instead. So this works for both of them, and I'm doing both right now in here so you can see which one you need to use. But if you're just using a text button without images, you can just use text button. Or if you're just using image buttons, you can just use image buttons. Or if you use them both, you can do it exactly like I'm doing it right here. So the next thing that we're going to want to do is set up more parameters. So we want to say we want to get the price from the buttons. So we're going to say local price value is equal to button find first child price. And then we're going to say price is equal to number price value. And so I was having issues with errors being thrown because it was saying like, oh, price is a string. So in order to fix that, we can say we can turn the price value into a number by using the function toNumber, and vice versa, we can turn it back into a string by doing the toString function. And so either way, we're going to be using both of these parameters, and it's just going to save us a little bit of time to go ahead and turn them into numbers and strings. So we're going to say button text is equal to button.name, and then we want to put the price as well. And so what this is going to do is whenever we play the game and we open the GUI, it's going to set the text of all of the buttons to whatever their button name is, and then the price as well. So it'll display how much it is without us having to type it in. And so once we have that, the next thing that we're going to want to do is check to see when a button is pressed. And so the way we do that is we say button.mouse mouse button one click, and then we say connect, and then we say function, and then do parentheses, and then we can get rid of the extra parentheses. And then we say if moneystat.value is greater than or equal to price, then, and then we'll say game.replicated storage, and this is where we'll have to go and create a remote event for this function. And what we want is for the client to fire a server event that the server event is going to receive. And I just noticed too that we need to make sure that we put price value dot value so we don't receive any errors. But as far as that is concerned, we can go ahead and create our remote event. So we're going to call this shop1 event, and we'll use this event whenever we want to, whenever the player buys something. So we'll say shop1 event, not clone. We'll say connect. No, actually, we'll say fire server instead. And so in the parentheses, it's very important that we send some information to the server. For example, we want to send the button name and the price to the server so that the server can receive both of those points of information and then manipulate it as needed. And so now that we have this, we're pretty much done. There's only one more thing I really want to do But I do want to check to see if these scripts are working. So we do want to put an else statement here, just to say if the player doesn't have enough money, then we want to print, okay, the player doesn't have enough money, so we're not throwing an error. And that'll also tell us if the script is working. But I should have enough money in my saved bank that we made yesterday to pretty much buy any of it. And there we go. So now that we have that set to visible, we're going to want to create a way that we can open this shop. And so the easiest way to do that is to put a script inside of a part with a proximity prompt. And then we're going to name this part just shop part, just so that we can stay organized. And then we're going to go into our script and we're going to start writing our parameters. So local prox is equal to script.parent.proximity prompt. And then we're going to say local function, and we're going to say open GUI. And so this is our local function that's actually going to fire a client event that our local script will receive, and then that local script will set the visibility to true. So we're going to create a remote event in replicated storage, and we're going to call it open shop one. And then in our local function, we're going to say game.replicatedStorage.openShop1, and then we're going to fire this event. So we're going to say event fire client, and then in the parentheses we need to put player in the OpenGUI, and we need to put player beside fire client. I'm going to show you what happens when you don't put those arguments in. It's just going to throw an error saying argument 1 is missing or nil, and so it's very easy to fix that. And every server script you do, you want to make sure you use the arguments, like the player argument and so on and so forth. Otherwise, it's just going to break the script. Like, the script is not going to know. It might receive an event, but it's not going to know for whom. So if you don't put player there, then it's not going to know, okay, we need to receive it for the player who fired it. So the next thing I'm going to do is I went ahead and wrote a event to receive our client event here, and it says game.replicatedStorage dot open shop one, and when it receives that event, it's going to set it to true. And then I also made it so that when we press any of the buttons, it'll set the GUI to false. And so it's not going to open yet because we didn't set those arguments like I was saying. And you can see here it says argument 1 is missing or nil, and so we can go into the script and actually fix that quickly just by adding player and player. So just by doing that, it should open the GUI. And let's test it. Let's see. Boom. So you can see it opens. Now I'm going to change a few more things in this script. Like, I want to make sure that the dollar signs are showing up. And you can also see whenever I press any of the buttons, it closes. So I also want to add like a close button. So if a player does decide that, you know, they want to buy something or they don't want to buy something, then they can press the close button and allow them to just get out of it easily. So it's pretty easy to script a close button. We're just going to duplicate one of the buttons in the scrolling frame, and then we're going to move it to the main frame. And then I'm just going to change the background transparency to 0.5. I'm going to rename it to close, and then I'm going to change the text to close as well, so everything displays correctly. If I can find the text. There it is. Because I got the same name as a number, it was hard to see. So now that we have that, all we got to do is just quickly code the close button. I'm going to add the dollar sign in real quick. And then we're going to go ahead and add our close button. So we're going to say local close is equal to frame.close, and then we're going to say close dot mouse button one click connect function parentheses, and then we're going to say frame.visible is equal to false. And so that will set the frame to false whenever we press the close button, and it'll get rid of the GUI for us. So we're going to set this GUI to visible is false, and now we're going to go in to our studio and test it. So as you can see, all the numbers are updated, and when we press close, it closes. So now that we have that, we are pretty much completely done with our coding of the GUI. Now if you want to add any new buttons, all you got to do is duplicate the button and change the price, and you also want to change the name to any whatever the tool is. And so we also want to make sure that the text is wrapped. So if you have like a tool that's like an extra long name, it's not going to go off of the button. We want it to stay on the button. So now that we have that, we can move on to our server-side script. So we're going to create a server script in starter players or starters. Oh my goodness, server script service. And we're going to open it up and start setting some parameters. So this script is going to be a little bit easier than our local script. We don't have to do any crazy loops or anything like that. All we have to do is receive the event from the client and then receive the information that was transmitted from the client. And then we just need to sort it and just make it perform some basic math. So the first thing I'm going to do is set up my parameters. I'm going to do server storage and replicated storage because I know I'm going to have to use those a few times. But after that, I don't need to set up any more parameters, I don't think. We can go ahead and move on to receiving our server event. And so I'm going to say replicated storage dot shop1 event connect function, or on server event connect function. And then in these parentheses here, we're going to want to put the information that we received from the client. So we're going to say player button.name, and then we're going to say price. And we're actually going to have to remove the dot from button name. It's just going to be button name with no period in it, which is fine. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but as long as we keep it in the same order as it was sent, it'll be received in the same order. And so player always comes first. Even though we don't have to put a player parameter in the client, player always comes first. Just remember that. So now that we have that, we can move on to setting up our parameters inside of this. So we're going to say local money stats is equal to player dot player stats dot cash. And so once we have that, it's pretty simple. All we're going to have to do is move on to our if statement. So we're going to check to see if the money stats is more than or equal to the price. And if it is, then what we want to do is subtract the price from the money stats. So we're going to say money stats dot value is equal to money stats dot value minus price. So now that we have that, there's a couple of things that we can do, and I'm going to show you a couple of options that might all work. We want to give the player the tool, and it's simple to do that, but there's a lot of ways to do it. And so what we want to do is set up a local parameter called tools, and we want to check to see if the tool actually exists. And so what we're going to do is just say local tool is equal to server storage finds first child and then the button name, because the button name is going to be the exact name of our tool. So it's going to search in the server storage for a tool that is named the button name. So now that we have that, what we can do is we want to clone the tool and set the parent of the tool to the player's backpack. And so the way we do that is we just say tool clone, and then we can say tool.parent is equal to player.backpack. And then there you have it. Like that'll work there, right? And while this will work, there are a couple of issues with it. First is that it's just not very efficient, and if the player resets, it's not going to reset to his starter pack. So what we want to do actually is separate the tool clone from the tool. So we can find the tool, and then we want to say local new tool is equal to clone, and then we can say new tool.parent is equal to player.backpack. Now this is a more efficient way of doing it, and the reason is because we actually set a parameter for the new tool instead of just cloning the previous tool. So it can be easily called in the script, and the script's not going to get confused to which tool is which. So the alternative way of doing all of this is probably the most efficient way, especially if you want to ensure that the player is going to receive the tool in a backpack, and to make sure the player is going to receive the tool in a starter pack. We're going to have to clone the tool twice and send it to two different areas, because when we send it to his starter gear the first time, it's not going to show up in his backpack. So we want to send it to his backpack, and then we want to send it to his starter gear. And so when he receives it in his backpack, he'll die. It'll no longer be in his backpack, but it will be in his starter gear. And so then that's when the game can say, okay, like the starter gear is automatically replicated to the backpack when the player is loaded. And so what we can do is set up our parameters for the backpack and the starter gear. So we're going to say player find first child backpack, and then player find first child starter gear. And then we're going to set up the parameter for the tool. And then we're going to say if starter gear, then we're going to say local new tool is equal to tool clone, and then new tool.parent is equal to starter gear. And the reason I'm putting these if statements is because we're going to have to clone the tool twice. And it's a lot easier to just put it inside of an if statement than it is to create two separate parameters for the same tool. Then we can just use one parameter name for the same tool. In this case, we would have three, because we would have the tool and then the two clones, which we have three now, but it looks a lot nicer when they're named the same. And so once we do this, when the player buys the tool, it'll go to his backpack and it will go to his starter gear. And so the last thing I'm going to do is just write a quick else statement, just to print the player doesn't have enough money, just in case the player doesn't have enough money and I don't want to throw an error. I'd rather it just print something in the output so that we know that the rest of the script is actually working. And so what I'm going to do now is just put my tools in the server storage 1, 2, and 3, because those are the names of my tools. And then we can test to see if when we buy it, it'll work, and then if we reset, it'll stay. So once we have this, pretty much everything is set up. We're ready to go in and see if it works. So let's try it out. Alright, so let's open up the shop, and boom, I got my tool. And so as you can see, it's also subtracting the money from my bank, and we have 3 tools. So there we go. Now if we reset and we respawn, it stays in my starter pack. So there you have it, guys. So that's pretty much it for this portion of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and if you like the video, subscribe, leave a like, and if you have any suggestions that you guys would like to see, make sure you leave a comment. I'm always looking for new projects, and I love doing all kinds of interesting stuff, so I'm always looking for a way to kind of push myself. So anyways, guys, that's all I have for you today. Remember to subscribe, like, comment, and hope you guys have a good day.